following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoneman. I'm your host on this program. On Perspectives, we look at a variety of issues that are of importance to Nashua residents and taxpayers and voters. We've looked at education quite frequently on this program, where we're concerned with the quality of education and test results and those kinds of things, because there are some very, very serious challenges right here in Nashua. If you've looked at education results at all in this city, you know that there are some serious issues. Today we're going to take a little different look at this problem and take a look at how the educators themselves are being educated, particularly with regard to the fundamentals, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Because the way an educator is educated will dictate or inform how they teach their students. And that is a key issue when we're looking at school performance. With me today in the studio is Dr. Elaine Holden from the Reading Foundation in Amherst. Dr. Holden, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you, because I think that the issue of educating the educator is much more profound than some folks at home might think. You think a teacher's trained, and whatever their training is, they know what they're doing, and we're off and running. And then we wonder, with all the training they've received, why do our results not rise to a higher level? Because they're not at a high level. We have to acknowledge, I think, the fact of that matter here in Nashua. But let's talk for a little bit about the Reading Foundation and what you started there and what your mission is on that, so we get a sense of your background. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on the importance of reading education and how our teachers are being taught.
Well, thank you very much. I really am excited to be here, so
Good.
I appreciate the time and the opportunity. The Reading Foundation essentially has two components. One, of course, is diagnostic. We focus on children with dyslexia, different types of reading challenges, math challenges, difficulties with written expression, even acquisition of a second language, such as, for example, French or Spanish or Italian, etc. So we do a diagnostic profile based upon very careful testing. And then I write a prescriptive treatment based on that child's unique and specific needs. And then we have a group of tutors who will be matched up to that child. So each tutor has strengths, and we take those strengths and match it up with the child's needs to customize the program for the individual child. We only do one-on-one. We don't do full day. We'll do maybe twice a week, maybe 5 times a week, maybe 3 or 4 hours a day, depending. We get contracts from public schools. We get contracts from private schools, certainly from parents. You know, we're open to anybody that comes to us with a child that needs help.
Well, we have a son at home. He's 4.5 years old. He'll be 5 in October. And he's getting into this excitement about reading. He loves, we talked about it before, he loves Pete the Cat, and he loves Thomas the Tank Engine, and there are wonderful books out there.
Sure.
It's our goal as parents to kind of instill in him a love for reading, because the world, of course, opens up. I'm not sure what we're going to do when it comes to schooling. I think we're going to homeschool because of some of the issues that are going on in the Nashua School District. I'd rather not have him in that environment. I think we can do a good job. My wife, by the way, is into education. I mean, she was an educator too, doing some special programs similar to what you've described. So you match tutors up because they have a particular experience that might be key to unlocking either this child's love for learning, reading, or their ability to do it. So that gets us to the issue of having a skill set in a teacher that matches the needs in a student. And when we talk about public education and the need to gain reading skills and all the other skills that follow with that, are there issues that you're seeing with the way teachers are educated that either maybe helps them, but maybe in more cases hinders them in their ability to convey this love of learning?
Yes.
That's a long question.
Long question, short answer.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, when you look at the professors that are the people training the teachers, you have to look at their background. In several instances, you have professors that have had limited experience in the classroom and limited experience with children who have reading needs, okay? So they have worked their way up the food chain, basically, till they get to be professors. And that means that they don't have that experience level. The other issue is that many of them trained in an era of whole language. Whole language was the belief that children just somehow or other magically acquired reading. There was not a lot of research at that point. Now, starting in about 1980, 1985, we did have the Health Research Extension Act that created reading research. Now, this goes back to the 70s. This goes back to the Vietnam era, where we saw big industries running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep up the war machine, okay? This is the military-industrial complex. The machinery that was used to create the weaponry, okay, both defensive and offensive, became very, very sophisticated. That sophistication required manuals for operation that were very large, some of them looking like the New York City Phone Directory. The people that operated those pieces of equipment, some of them were $250,000 a piece. The people that operated those pieces of equipment were well trained in how to operate the equipment, but didn't have the reading skills to be able to handle the manual. So what happens was that the machines went down. When you have a machine down 1, 2, 3 shifts, you're still paying the people that are operating, but they can't produce, all right? And you're going on military contracts. They need their stuff. So what happens, they did a research study, many of the companies found that these guys couldn't read the manuals, hired people like me, I was down in Pratt & Whitney back in 1971, and said, fix the manuals. Now, I think I'm pretty good, but I cannot turn something the size of a New York phone directory into a threefold. It's not going to happen. And you report back to the CEOs. Well, the CEOs get together, they talk, because they're trying to pick each other's pocket for guys who can not only operate the machines, but can read the manuals, and we don't have enough to go around. They go to their legislators. Their legislators start knocking on doors. And that's why the Health Research Extension Act got passed, because there was a reading problem back in the 1970s.
Interesting.
Those individuals that were trained in whole language, that graduated from high school, did not have the reading skills to handle the manuals. All right, so this is not brand new. This goes back a while. Now, fast forward. You see this Health Research Extension Act, which now has 210,000 children in 22 national sites. It's a longitudinal study, largest in the world, okay? And this study is very clear. 50% of the students are going to learn to read and write with ease. You give them that New York City phone directory and a Denny's menu, and they're flying. Now you look at the other 50%. Of that 50%, 30% are going to find learning to read the toughest thing they ever have to do in their lives. So, yes, you can pretty much give any program to this top 50%. They're going to read. But now let's look at that 30 to maybe 40% down here that struggles mightily. All right? You need specialized instruction for that. And now you look at the teachers that are teaching the teachers, the professors who have done their studies on the top 50%. And yes, they'll do just great with whole language. They're going to do fine because they're going to learn to read no matter what. And nobody's looking at these kids. Well, the Health Research Extension Act looked at these kids and they said, this is not the way to do it. You need direct, systematic, language-based, spiraling, meaningful instruction. You need to teach them cursive. You need to do a lot of things with these kids that you don't have to do with these over here. That research is clear, and that research has been around a long time, all right? And now we have No Child Left Behind. And we have the National Reading Panel publishing very clear directions, 450 pages worth in 2002, making the same recommendations. So we have that information. But now you have professors who have done their research on whole language and this, this whole so-called balanced literacy, which is the new buzzword, and they're not touching these kids over here because the belief for a long time was either they're readers or they're not, and if they're not, oh well. Yeah. So you have professors who do not have experience teaching the children who are not going to get reading no matter how you teach them. They can teach the top 50%, great, but they can't teach these other kids over here. And these are the ones that are so-called slipping through the cracks. We've got a cascade of kids coming through the cracks right now because we don't have teachers to teach them. Now, I don't want to blame the teachers because teachers teach what they've been taught, okay? If they've never been taught, or if they've only been exposed to something and not had sufficient grounding and practice, they're not going to be able to effectively teach these children that don't acquire reading naturally, just like the top 50%, okay? Now, I have to say that there are methodologies out there, and there are levels of instruction. But when a special ed director sends people for this specialized instruction and says, yes, 10 hours of a superficial overview, and then tells them that they're fully certified to teach this program, that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. They're not, and they're going to limp through and probably not be effective in teaching these children that have very direct needs on how to be taught reading. Now, the other thing is that if you look at how teachers are taught in this state, and I don't have the names of the colleges and universities specifically, okay? I can only tell you that teachers have to pass courses and then take a test before they can get licensed. So licensure hinges on testing as well as passing courses. There are specific tests that teachers have to take. Wonderful. There is a college or university, and I don't have the name because I can't pull it out of the Department of Ed, but there is one in this state that historically has had 85% failure rate. Now, if you have a test that is designed to be given really nationally on what has to be taught and how you teach it, what you have to know to teach reading, okay? You have a test. It is based on the research done by the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. It is based on the National Reading Panel. It is based on No Child Left Behind. You've got foundation that is research-based. That's where you get the test. You're expecting the professors to provide the correct instruction so that these students can take this test and pass. When you have an 85% failure rate, something is wrong. And when you have other colleges / universities in this state that have a 50% failure rate or a 45% failure rate, my question is it the student or is it the professor? Now, if it's the college university issue, that college should weed out those students who are not going to make the grade no matter what. If it's a failure to teach because you've got unprepared professors, it still behooves the college / university to step up and say, this is what has to be done. If you have a failure rate that ranges from 45% to 85% failure rate, somebody's not doing their job.
Yeah, that's a horrible rate. I'm
Yes, it
shocked
is.
to hear that,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yes.
When I was in grad school, I taught an undergraduate course in business statistics. It was a class that the undergraduates had to take. Nobody was there because they wanted to be there. They were there because they had to sit in those seats. And I knew that going in. So my job was to figure out how to teach them material they weren't interested in, really didn't want to learn, but to get them through it, not just to pass a test, which is obviously important because that's the measure, but to actually learn something.
Sure.
in the process. And the challenge that I was facing was always to somehow figure out if this kid is getting stuck at this point, well, let's figure out a different way to explain that point.
Yeah.
And if this kid gets that but misses over here, let's figure out how to get that message to him or her. And that was the challenge. And I enjoyed it, frankly, because, and I learned a lot in that process. I'm not a teacher by license or anything. I am a licensed flight instructor, so we teach one-on-one.
Right.
And the challenge there really is the same thing. It's if we're teaching landings, for instance, you want to, not everyone learns it the same way. You have to figure out if someone's getting stuck at a particular point, we have to figure out how to do that so that ultimately he's going to be as good at landing as the other guy over here who got it in, 5 hours.
I had to line my wings up with the tree line. That was how I learned to land.
Yep, whatever it takes,
Yeah.
that's how we do it. And I think it's definitely up to those universities to put the time and energy into teaching, because I believe everyone can be lifted up. Education is supposed to lift someone from the level they're at and bring them to a new level.
Yes.
And sadly, in Nashua, that doesn't happen. There seems to be a belief that, well, you're at this level, you're going to be at that level. And I find that just horrible. And that's one of the big reasons we're going to homeschool, I think, our son. But I believe that the kids who are at this level can be lifted up. That's the whole idea behind education, is to lift people up to a new level.
If you teach them the correct way, of course you're going to lift them up.
So these teachers need to be taught that way so that
Yes.
they in turn can not ignore that 50% of the classroom.
They also have to be allowed. I didn't mean to interrupt,
That's
but I'm
okay.
getting all excited
Good.
now. They also have to be allowed to teach it. All right? So we can't keep taking time out of class, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, to prep them for the so-called tests, the high-stakes tests. It has to be consistent right through that 180 days. You also have to have support from the administration. I actually had a graduate student come to me after she had graduated. She had been in the business for a couple of years. She had been teaching, and she said, okay, I did what you taught me. I did it right. All of my students are on or above grade level. She was a first grade teacher, and she was just amazing. I wound up actually hiring her at the Reading Foundation. She was wonderful. She still is. She's not with us any longer. She's on the other side of the state, but she is a crackerjack. So what happened when she got her kids to such a good level as at the end of first grade? I mean, they were rocking and rolling. The second grade teacher complained because she had to change her curriculum and she had to do something different. And the principal came in and said, you're making the other teachers look bad, dial it back.
Oh my goodness.
All right? So you need to have, right across the board, support from professionals that you're teaching with and a teaching ethic that is really high. And you have to have administration that supports the teachers, not just as lip service, but actually understands what reading is and supports the teachers when they are doing a different type of instruction. It doesn't have to be special ed. And in fact, it shouldn't be special ed. We have something called RTI, Response to Intervention. I happen to have written a book on it a few years ago, and I will tell you right now that if the so-called balanced literacy doesn't work, remember that 50%, they're going to get it just fine. If the balanced literacy doesn't work for the other kids, don't lie to the parents. Don't say they're emerging. Don't say they're on the level of the class average. Don't do smoke and mirrors. Don't lie. And I've actually seen publishers of programs, reading programs, tell teachers to do that. Admit, this particular program isn't working. We need to separate these kids out into a homogeneous group and teach them a different way. If you're in special ed, the goal is to teach the same curriculum a different way, not teach a different curriculum the same way. And that's what's happening in special ed. And that's a whole other topic. You're going to have me back here for that. But when you have these teachers that are teaching Tier 2, they, one, have to have the time to teach Tier 2, and two, they have to have the skill set to be able to do it, so that they're teaching the same thing, but they're teaching it the way the children learn, as you say, the same way you do it, one-on-one with your people learning to fly. Now, one-on-one is tier 3, and that's probably the most challenging of all. Teachers don't have a chance to do tier 3 because they're doing too much in the classroom. But it shouldn't have to be special ed at this point. RTI is not a special ed intervention. It is regular ed, which means we get the people in who actually know how to teach to deliver the services. And that's where you need to have a different configuration in a classroom. But if the goal is to have children learn to read, we understand from research how children learn to read. We understand that not all children learn to read the same way. We understand that you have to differentiate the education. And we understand that the teachers need support to do this, but at the same time, they also need to be instructed and have sufficient experience so that they can do it correctly and successfully. There's a lot that goes into the process. We know what should be done. We know it can be done. Whether or not it is being done, that's another question.
A moment ago, you used the phrase, if educating the kids or getting the kids to read is the goal. And we talked a little bit beforehand. I'll share some of my personal view. I look at the Nashua School District as an alderman when I was on the board, and I listen to really the excuses that are made. And it really causes me to wonder, maybe cynically, if getting the kids to read is really the goal. Is it more to grow an organization? Is that the goal? Or to keep a certain number of teachers employed? Is that the goal? What's the goal really? Because if there's so much money is being spent and so much effort, and as you say, this study was started back in the 70s and the 80s. This is not like it's just came out 2 weeks ago and no one's had a chance to look at this. This has been around for decades. If this information, and really the key to unlocking reading skills, and 50% of the child population has been out for all this time, why isn't it happening? And I start to wonder, what's the real goal? Because I think in the end, people achieve the goals they set.
Sure.
And so it makes me wonder what goals are really being set. We don't need to go there if you don't want to, but what can we do to get folks, teachers, school districts, whatever, on board with developing this?
Well, I think it's going to be a 2 or perhaps 3-pronged approach. First of all, you have to get the colleges and universities on board. All right, and that's going to be an issue because they are entities unto themselves and they don't have to do anything, or they can pay lip service and tell you they're doing it and they're not. There's a lot of things that they say can happen that doesn't happen. They move slowly. As my cousin Rose says, they're like cold molasses moving up a tree in January.
That's pretty slow.
Okay, that's pretty slow. And so that's one issue. Then you have to have administrative support, administrative knowledge, and understanding. It's not a question of throwing more money at it. It really isn't.
I agree with that.
Some of these programs are prohibitively costly. And the reality is when you're teaching reading, you don't need all that stuff, okay, especially at the younger levels. And less is sometimes better, but you have to know what to purchase. You have to know what you're doing, all right? You'll hear educators say, but we're in charge of the whole child. We're in charge of developing the whole child. And, you know, the doors of public schools are wide open for everybody. And when you have kids coming in with a wide variety of experiences, I will tell you in the state of New Hampshire right now, 11% of the population, grades 1 through 12, suffers from the after effects of chronic otitis media with effusion, ear infections. That costs us as taxpayers over $30 million a year to address the academic needs of these children who have historically, from very young age, I'm talking 6 months old, maybe 6 weeks old, experienced chronic ear infections. That interferes with their acquisition of language. Acquisition of language is essential to learning to read and communicate, etc. So you've got this 11% of the population, all right, that you need to give specialized treatment to. If you don't do it right and you don't do early intervention, it's going to cost you much more money down the line. That has to be looked at. Those populations have to be looked at early and often. And these are the ones that are going to need the extra money, the extra attention. But yeah, I agree, you have to educate the whole child. But if you're focusing on language, on reading, on acquisition of reading, writing, and mathematics and spelling is the other side of the reading coin, they enhance each other. So you don't memorize spelling words, you use the spelling words as a vehicle to teach them to read. If you're doing it correctly and you're focusing in on this, then there's a greater opportunity for success for more children. And it doesn't necessarily become a special ed issue.
Yeah, I like that you're saying that. I think it doesn't seem to me to be a special ed issue. Special ed shouldn't be 50% of the population. It should
Heavens,
be,
no.
these are kids who have the ability. They just need to have a little help along the way, and that's not special ed help. It's regular ed help in some sense.
Yes, they need tier 2 or tier 3. Before they go into special ed. Special ed is for the dyslexic, for a number of other issues, including, special ed doesn't really touch 504, but that's other health impaired. We do have children with hearing issues, vision issues, children on the autism spectrum, any number of medical implications.
Sure.
These children also should be educated.
Absolutely, but that's not 50% of the population.
No, not by a long shot.
Yeah.
Not
and
by
I think
a long shot.
that where Nashua misses, it has those kids that excel. I don't know if it's 50% that excel, but it has those kids who excel no matter what.
Yes.
But there's a very large chunk. In fact, the reason our test scores and our averages are low is because those kids who don't do well is just too large of a population. It becomes the average, and that's unfortunate. I like that you said that we should focus on cursive writing. I think cursive writing, as an adult, I was writing something out for another adult that I was teaching, and he says, "Wow, you use cursive." I had to read it to him, So that's unfortunate. He's a smart guy, but was never taught that. So there are a lot of things that we can do. And I look forward to having you on the show again, where I can see we're out of time here. It goes very, very quickly. It's very enlightening. I think that we have to look at education and find some positive ways to make a change. We can't just complain about it, but clearly there are issues, and I think there are boundaries and borders and fiefdoms that are put up to prevent success, and we need to maybe reduce the fear of those folks towards exploring some of those new things. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Holden, for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you here. We'll have to talk again.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you folks at home, too, for tuning in. My name is David Schoneman. You're watching Perspectives. I'm here with Dr. Elaine Holden. We're talking about teaching the teachers as a core element to the success of education right here in Nashua. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.